Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I have made it through another week, another month, another quarter, another whatever slice of time you measure. I'm not sure what I've learned in any of those spans, but well, I'm going to keep fighting entropy until it all falls apart, I guess. Now, for this week's show, speaking of entropy, I drove about 400 miles round trip to Providence, Rhode Island on Saturday. And I used to do that sort of thing for the show in the before time. I only did shows in person, did a lot of driving on weekends for it. But that was, well, the before time was also before I turned 50. And it turns out that much driving time is not so great for me anymore. Been a little sore, a little sciatic, little neck, little everything, speaking of entropy. But while I was up there, I got to drop in on my longtime friends, Paul DeFilippo and Deb Newton, because I'm just incapable of making that sort of trip without letting friends know I'll be in town, even if it's only for, half an hour of conversation before hitting the road again. But the point of the trip was to bring you this week's conversation with Leela Corman, a cartoonist and artist who has an amazing new graphic novel out today, April 2nd, 2024, for you time travelers out there. It's called Victory Parade. It's from Shockin' Books, and it is devastatingly good. The Victory Parade centers on a pair of women in World War II era Brooklyn. Rose works in the Navy Yards. Ruth is a German Jewish refugee who lives with her and helps take care of Rose's daughter, while her husband, Sam, Rose's husband, Sam, is away fighting in Europe. And their lives unfold through Leela's masterful storytelling, and this world gets rendered in her amazing watercolors. And she shows us, well, through the writing and through the body language and everything she evokes, the camaraderie of the women who are newly drawn into the workforce when all the men are away fighting in the war. And she shows the isolation of Ruth, who's been uprooted from Europe and is trying to make her way in New York, and the violence she carries inside her. And Rose's affair with a disabled vet, and her, we'll say, ambivalence about her husband's safety and his eventual return, and all the family traumas that we carry along in our blood. The book ultimately culminates in bringing us the horrors of Buchenwald, the death camps. I don't mean to make this sound bleak. This is not a 100% depressing book. There's lightness and love throughout it. And that's part of the camaraderie that I brought up, and the sense of familiarity that you get with these characters as people. And there are a couple of Busby Berkeley dance numbers that take place during it, too, these wonderfully choreographed pieces that Leela does. Plus, along the way, Ruth gets drawn into the world of professional women's wrestling, which is a plot that allows Leela to bring back her character Meyer Birnbaum from her previous graphic novel Untersaken, which you should also read. And it's a credit to her as a storyteller that she can bring these elements in without the story ever veering into absurdity. Even, as Ruth grows as a heel and embraces this nihilistic persona, or maybe that the ring opens her up to that nihilism. It is something. And while most of the book is telling the stories of these women and some of the women around them and a few of the men, ultimately the perspective moves to the male world of soldiers liberating a death camp, and we're brought face to face with the trauma that the men will never be able to escape. and the fallout that leaves on their families. We see how these curses perpetuate, how trauma keeps traveling through the generations. I'm not doing it enough justice. For all that heaviness that I just mentioned, Victory Parade, it soars. It's paced beautifully. The expressionist visuals that Leela brings are just gorgeous to behold, and the characters feel real, both in their words and actions and in their stillnesses. We talk a little about her sense of editing within scenes in our conversation, and I'll say that the book brings a seeming roving eye perspective that's actually very carefully trained. And on top of that, her colors are just amazingly evocative, both in the day-to-day scenes and the flights of fancy and nightmare that punctuate this entire book. It's just a fantastic achievement. And I was so glad that Leela had time to sit down with me right before publication, because we sort of orbited around each other and had a couple of brief conversations over the years, but we never really got to sit down and talk like two people. And that's what you're about to get. So go get Victory Parade, out now from Schocken Books. Now, as caveats go, there are some chimes in the background every so often. Also, Leela is married to the cartoonist, artist, and teacher, Tom Hart, who was a past guest of the show. So when she mentions Tom, that's who she's talking about. Oh, and when we both embarrassingly blank on the name of a Love and Rockets character late in the episode, it is Vicky Glory who we're trying to think of. Anyway, I emailed her that the next day when it occurred to me. Now, here's Leela's bio. Leela Corman is a painter, educator, and graphic novel creator working in the realm of diaspora Ashkenazi culture and third-generation restorative work. Her books include Untersaken, which was nominated for an Eisner Award, a Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and Le Prix Artemisia, won the 2015 Romix Prize for Best Anglo-American Comic, and received a 2023 MoCA Arts Festival Award of Excellence. And the short comics collections You Are Not a Guest and We All Wish for Deadly Force. Her work has appeared in many publications, including The Believer, Nautilus, and The Nib. She is a founding instructor at Sequential Artists Workshop and an instructor at Rhode Island School of Design. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Leela Corman. How did Victory Parade begin, and how did it change?
It began with a single image, like a lot of my work. I usually get a kind of a flash image and realize, oh, crap, this is a book, isn't it? There goes the next 7 years of my life. I was at the very end stage of pregnancy with my second child, Molly Rose. And I had this, I can't even remember if I found the photo before or after I had the idea, but I think it might have been generated by, I had this bookmark from some museum that had a photograph of a woman during the Second World War, riveting an airplane together, in coveralls and a head like a kerchief. And I just suddenly thought I should do a book set in the Brooklyn Navy Yard about these women. These are really interesting women. This time period is really interesting. This is where a bunch of things could have changed in this country that did not. I don't want to go out on a limb talking about the history and the after effects of it, because it's not my area of specialization, and someone who is a historian of the time and of women's work would probably have really interesting things to say that I don't know about changes that were generated from that time period. But regardless, that was a time when women were suddenly in the workforce. I should also really qualify, when we talk about that, I think we're talking about white women a lot. Women of color.
Yeah. Although the first page, you seem to start with somebody who's not exactly white.
Well, there were a lot of black women and other women of color working in those factories. And we can get to the research that I did that you don't really see except in moments like that later on, if you want to put a pin in that for a question. But a lot of the time when people talk about that time period, they sort of celebrate it as women were entering the workforce, but nobody really acknowledges in that conversation they mean white women. Black women were already working.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of history around black women workers organizing in that time period, too, which is not in the scope of my book, because it was not my place to talk about that history.
Sure.
But it was very present in my research. Same with the U.S. Army and segregation in the Army. That was if I remember correctly, was that the last segregated war?
I think so. I think they integrated in...
During Korea,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. I was just watching an episode of MASH where they had a combat engineer major who was basically sending his black troops to get massacred so we could send them home. So,
I love MASH. We watch a lot of MASH.
I know she had the box set over there.
That was my gift to myself when I had Molly Rose. And now they're all on Hulu. But the great thing about the box set is you can turn off the laugh track.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's good because, it gets a little infuriating.
Oh, it's so irritating. It's so much better without it.
Yeah.
In any case, so that I had this sort of idea percolating. This was in 2013. And I had really only just started making comics again that year after finishing Untersaken and then my first child dying. So I didn't do any work in that year. I went on this really weird book tour in the middle of that year, and then I was just kind of mostly very withdrawn, as you might imagine. I started drawing comics again really when I got pregnant with Molly Rose. And the thing that tends to happen when I know I have an idea for a big book is it's usually something that I'm not ready to make yet stylistically. Mm-hmm. So I let it sit for a while and I make short things. And that's what I did for the next couple of years. I made all the work that ended up in You Are Not a Guest and in We All Wish for Deadly Force. And I was kind of experimenting with my style. In 2015, I hit that watercolor style that I work in now. And that was like a revelatory experience. That was like the portal between life and death opening.
Yeah.
Do
you feel you have watercolor under control?
Oh, I always have. I mean, that's the thing is I was a really good watercolorist from the time I was a child. It just came naturally to me. I don't know why. I just didn't bring it into my comics for a long time. I was really enamored of black ink. And when I started working in watercolor, I became incapable of working in just ink. Mm-hmm. So it feels dead to me now. Yeah. Although that may change. Who knows? I don't know. But how it changed. So, it started with that little single image. And as I let it percolate, I realized, shit, I'm going to have to engage with the Holocaust because this is the Second World War. I can't stay away from it. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is that I really didn't want to work with that subject. Mm-hmm. I had gone through a long period much earlier in my life, early 2000s, of being very obsessed with it, not making work about it. It's my family history. So sure. There were all of these angles that I was studying about it that had not been subjects of discussion in my childhood that I wanted to learn more about. And then I sort of recoiled from that at a certain point, and I really couldn't engage with it for a long time. So when I started working on Victory Parade, I thought, or thinking about it, I wasn't even working on it. I thought, okay, well, obviously I have to come back to this now. And then circumstances really conspired. In 2015, I started really noticing the way that asylum seekers were being talked about and refugees. And it's the same language they used against us in the 1930s. Even literally, like you could swap out the words Jewish for Iraqi or Syrian, and the part where they say, we can't let them in because Nazi infiltrators might come in with them. You could swap out Nazi with Al-Qaeda or ISIS. It's bullshit, all of it. But, this is the first steps towards fascism, and it was really clear to me that was what was coming. This was before the 2016 election. I didn't make this book because of the 2016 election or because of fascist politics on the rise globally. This was already percolating for me, but things can converge sometimes in ugly ways when you're working. I guess they can converge in nice ways too, but in this case it was pretty ugly. Yeah. I pitched the book in June of 2016 in a very different time, and I don't remember exactly when the character started to expand and when the wrestler showed up, but I think she might have been there from the beginning. It just seems sort of obvious from the beginning. the pattern that I'm starting to see between Untersaken and this book is that I have this idea that is a little bit of a sort of like a let's all go back to school and eat our vegetables kind of idea. Like, let's talk about a really interesting and empowering historical period for women. And then a secondary character comes in who's some kind of a performer, and that person is the one who I really want to draw.
Yeah.
So that was Esther in Untersaken, and it's
I'll say I really thought Fania was going to be this lead. I'm like, there's an awful lot of pages going with the sister on this one, but okay, I'm sure she'll tie it all together.
Yeah,
but I figure she's also more fun to draw. But
well, at the time I was a performer. I was a performing belly dancer, and that was coming into that book a lot.
Sure.
In really fun ways, and I love burlesque, I love vaudeville, so I love backstage and costumes and the weird intersection of the public and private that performance is. In 2015, I illustrated the wrestling-themed Mountain Goats album, Beat the Champ, and that was the first time I'd ever drawn wrestlers.
Yeah.
I think you can probably tell that I have a martial arts background and not a wrestling background from the way that I draw. The movements that they're doing aren't really necessarily wrestling moves. Although I watched a lot of wrestling footage. But that was kind of the transition of that book and how it started to expand and become what it is now. And then from there, things just kind of build organically. Boy, I mean, I don't know how long of an answer you want about how the plot, such as it is, evolved.
Yeah, I mean, well, what if we'll say you pitch it in summer of 2016, and by November of 2016, the world had changed very drastically. How much did that affect what you ended up making as a book?
I think it affected the mood.
Yeah.
I've always worked with heavy material. It felt to me in the years that I was doing kind of work for money, fun stuff, silly stuff, like that was a vacation I was taking from where I was really going to end up as an artist, and where I had initially intended to end up as an artist early in my life as well. So when I started working in watercolor and started making much more serious work, I could feel the ground shifting under me artistically already. Like I'm doing the thing I was supposed to be doing all along. The sort of light stuff fell away.
Had you been cognizant of that in the earlier days? That something bigger was on the horizon?
Oh yeah. I mean, I had always.
And did you feel guilt about it?
About not working that way?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say guilt. I felt grief because I, from an early age, knew that I was going to be a professional artist. I grew up in New York in the 80s and was really fortunate to be exposed to a lot of stuff on the ground, like really interesting art in art galleries in Soho before that became a very gentrified place when I was very small, or like parents' friends who were artists who lived in huge lofts in very deserted blocks of Soho in the late 70s, very early 80s. I remember going over to a couple of painter studios when I was 7 or 8 years old and feeling like this is my future. Yeah. And that happened with even greater certainty when I was 11 and my grandparents moved back to Philadelphia, my American grandparents. And I was taken to the Philadelphia Museum of Art for the first time, and I saw the Surrealist and Modernist wing, which is called the Ahrensburg wing, which is why the character's last name is Ahrensburg.
Yeah.
That's an homage to the Ahrensburg wing of the PMA.
Nice.
Really important place to me, like foundational. I remember seeing the Dali and Magritte and Duchamp and Brancusi and thinking, this is my future. When I went to art school, I came in like a heat-seeking missile. Like I am here to perfect my talent into a skill. I'm here to be an artist. I'm here to like make my life happen. Which, of course, that's like how people enter school usually.
Yeah.
So nothing out of the ordinary about that. But then in my sophomore year, I had a painting teacher who just destroyed me and knocked me off of the path of painting completely. So I stopped painting. I always wanted to be a painter. That's what I gravitate to as an artist and what I'm best at. Mm-hmm. And I never really dealt with the grief of that. I sort of swallowed it. Like, sort of like half swallowing a knife, And then I just kept going, and I kept trying to like figure out, okay, well, how do I fit into being an artist now that I'm not allowed to do this thing that I really want to be doing? Which that we could have a whole other conversation about how 19-year-olds interpret the bad behavior of bad teachers.
Oh, trust me. A year ago, I actually showed a couple of things of mine to Thomas Woodruff, your colleague at SVA.
Tom's colleague, really, but
okay.
I only ever really subbed at SVA.
Oh, okay.
But
I didn't
very
realize.
friendly with all of those people.
But yeah. Woodruff's line was, "Gil, stop with the fucking microns. Learn to use a goddamn brush." Melted my brain. It was impossible for me to draw for months after that. I'm like, I got it. I'm cheating, obviously, because this good artist actually feels I'm yeah. Eventually, I found a balance, and I've gotten better with a brush. But
I would hope that you might take that as permission to use a brush or invitation instead of
I know, but
prohibition against using a micron.
Nonetheless, yeah, it just messed with my head a little bit, and
It's hard to, as being a teacher myself now. To me, teaching is a sacred responsibility. You're dealing with really vulnerable young people. And when I'm teaching people who are not young, who are my age or older, they're also vulnerable because it's a power relationship.
Sure.
So
in our case, it was fun. But, it was still just yeah, he's right. I'm kind of half-assing it by doing this. I really should learn the line. And
I mean, learn it if you want to.
Yeah. But anyway, back to you, having your soul destroyed back at 19.
I mean, I went kind of back and forth for a few years with different majors and quitting school and coming back and quitting again and coming back. And finally, I decided at a certain point in my mid-20s, I need to get paid to draw pictures, so I guess I'll just go major in illustration. And I did, and I made a successful career out of that, more or less, for a while. But while I was doing it, when I was a working commercial illustrator, I really enjoyed it. I don't renounce it or anything, but I always knew that I wasn't really going deep. I knew that there was that I was kind of scratching the surface of my abilities as an artist and as a thinker. I was also making comics the whole time. I remember I had this experience. I had a set of experiences kind of around 2008, 2009, which is kind of when my illustration career almost came to an end because of the financial crash, the way that so many of us really had to change our careers. But I also had a baby in 2009. And when you're a self-employed woman artist and you have a kid, there's no support.
Yeah.
When you're an employed woman and you have a kid.
Still dodgy.
Yeah. Or, I should say person with a uterus, right?
Yeah,
birthing person, Yeah. There's no support for parents and children. And I was home for 14 months with my kid because we had no money for childcare. We were living in Brooklyn in the aftermath of the recession, and there was just nothing. So the blow to my career, I think I've only just started to finally get past in the last couple of years. Really, pandemic era and since. So, I'm doing illustration this whole time and making comics. And when I was kind of in the middle of that, I was working on Untersaken, and I heard Nico Case for the first time. I heard her music for the first time. And I remember having this kind of jolt, thinking, if I could make a comic that's as powerful as this music, that would be... Then I would feel like I was really living up to my full potential as an artist. Mm-hmm. So I tried to put that into Untersaken, and I didn't quite, but almost. But I mean, I forget exactly where you might have to edit some of this meandering out.
Please.
So I'm just sort of
You've listened
blabbing.
to the show. This is what I do. No, that sense of progressing as an artist, finding yourself as a cartoonist. And even the question I have after Untersaken to this, what did you learn from that experience that you transformed? Now, you've already mentioned shifting into watercolor from there. I'll say comparing the two books, visually, everything's consistent here. Where in the previous book, there's stylistically, people look a little different from, section to section sometimes, where there's a unity to Victory Parade on top of the storytelling and everything else that you're doing that shows, an artist who made a major jump in the span of, I guess 13 years?
Well, it depends where you start from. I pitched Untersaken in 2007. I think that's when we signed the contract for it.
Yeah.
And I started working on it. It came out in 2012. Then I kind of didn't do anything for a while. And then from 2013 to 2016, I was working on all of the short nonfiction pieces that you've seen, and experimenting with different styles to get there. Well, other things changed as well. We left New York City, moved to Gainesville, and I had a studio for the first time in my life, which really changed my practice completely. And I also, there's no substitute for having a dedicated space to work in. And in Gainesville, that's a small enough town that I did not mind having it out of my house. It was better, actually. Yeah. And that was a calculated decision. I need to find a place that's not in this house because that town is so small and sleepy that if I stayed in the house all day, I'd lose my mind. Right. Yeah. Which did happen later when I moved my studio back into my house right before the pandemic, maybe a year before.
Yeah.
But it made a huge difference. And also, I started to fall back in love with art in a way that I had not allowed myself to since art school. I had been too hurt by the experience and too armored about it. And when I started to finally fall back in love with the experience of looking at art, I fell back in love with contemporary art too, and being able to separate it from the art world as a commercial entity, as a whatever it is that I don't have any experience of. I don't enjoy being in those places. The art itself and the making of it, that really contributed to how my work changed as well.
How so?
It's hard to parse out. It made my work what it is, I
just didn't know if you saw certain elements that I wasn't doing this before I really started integrating artist X into my
No, it was more like reintegration. You're allowed back into this space now.
Okay.
Which, that was kind of the story of my life at a certain point. For about 5 years, was like coming back into spaces I thought I wasn't permitted into. Mm-hmm. And thus regaining all of the things that I didn't know I had lost, which I think is not an uncommon experience for people either. So really, I'm so grateful to have had that experience.
Talk about the sense of permission when it comes to telling these stories.
Well, in storytelling, I've never needed permission.
Yeah.
Fuck permission. In fact, I think the world is lucky that I am here to tell those stories. Sorry if that sounds arrogant.
No, please.
But no, I don't. And this is actually a big part of my teaching pedagogy too. I want people to understand that the only person's permission you need to tell a story that you really are driven to tell is your own. Where that needs some qualification is when you're telling true stories that involve other people, sure. And then you have to get consent or change the details enough that they're not recognizable. And I think that this is actually kind of a generational thing too. Like we were talking off mic about some of the Canadian cartoonists we love, right? And just art. I think my generation and the generation or half generation immediately before me of comics people come from a place of putting it all out on the page, without holding anything back. And this is like a very Gen X way of making work. I understand that it was the underground cartoonists who started that, but they were really doing that, I think, with unpacking a lot of fantastical id stuff.
Sure.
What I think a lot of the post-underground cartoonists in the 80s and 90s, the ones who really influenced me, what they were doing was a little different. It was more about kind of barfing out every personal detail or detail about conversations you had with people or your observations and opinions about the world. Obviously, the mother of this is Aileen Kaminsky-Crumb.
Sure. Yeah.
May she rest in Chanel or whatever she loved best.
We met a few times, and I am so bummed we never sat down to record. And it was always, we'll get together sometime, Gil. That'll be, and I'm
the opposite. I got to interview her for Publishers Weekly,
man.
But I never got to hang out with her, and I would have loved to have just hung out with her. Man.
Right before the pandemic, when she was here for the Weirdo thing, I was interviewing the Big Book of Weirdo had come out, and they were doing a big event at Columbia University with a whole bunch of the artists. And I was down to interview Pete Bagg while I was there. Pete says to me, Bob and Aileen are in the hotel. Do you want to meet with them while we're here?
You said no?
I was like, yeah, no, Pete, that would be great. I'd love to.
Okay.
I'd met Aileen once before, but, introduced to Bob, but, Aileen clearly wanted to spend some time talking to me. And, we had a nice chat fest for a little while. But, again, they were headed off to this event at Columbia. I didn't have time to go with them. But there'll always be time to get to. Same with Diane Newman. Oh, we'll get together sometime. Yeah. And, yeah. So anyway, that's taking us on the sidetrack. Aileen
Weirdo is really important to me developmentally. Mm-hmm. I like to say that Raw made me realize how much I wanted to make comics, and Weirdo made me realize that I could.
Nice. That's a good way to put it.
It's really pithy, but it's true. I wish that I had flown up for that event at Columbia. I was still in Florida, and I missed a lot of stuff when I was living there.
Yes, like October 2019.
Yeah, so, I would have been. Yeah, I remember what I was doing then.
There's like a thing, I guess 15, 20 years ago out in Chicago that was like that, where it was just like Mount Rushmore times 5. It was just all of these Pantheon level people, getting together for some festival. And it's like, yeah, without them, we don't do any of this stuff, and we don't have any of the art that we actually care about, or the career that you've built for yourself, or the art that you've made. Anyway, talk about your influences in comics, I guess. We'll go from there. But.
I mean, influences, that's a whole thing, Your
lineage.
There's the comics lineage, then there's... I really come from a fine art background.
Yeah. Which permeates Victory Parade.
I trained as a painter, which I'm sure you can tell. And the divergence that I talked about earlier never beat that out of me. It just, made it dormant for a long time.
Did it affect your compositions, even when you were just doing ink? Were you still...
My training?
The compositions of pages and panels.
Definitely. I mean, I had a really strong kind of classical 2D training in art school. One thing that I say to students when they ask me what the rules of...
Paper, pen, get going.
The rules of comics in terms of composition, page composition. Oh, this term that I hate that sometimes I hear students using now, paneling. Ew. I don't know the origin of that, but kill it with fire.
If you people could see my face right now.
Yeah, Gil just made a very sad and disgusted face.
Now, I've seen Dash Shaw and Frank Santoro talk about, like, doing a presentation talking about, page composition overall, moving the eye, and thinking that much about, how pages themselves were laid out, was something I had always taken on intuitively. You just sort of take it in, or when it's not working. But,
well, here's the thing. Yeah. It isn't. It is intuitive, and it is trained.
Yeah.
So
when you make a mistake doing it, it becomes, oh, yeah, that doesn't work. At least when I've tried drawing. But anyway,
it's the classical training, the hard, constant repetition of working with page composition in a 2D plane in school trains you to do it in a way that looks intuitive, but is very actually trained. So I'm not pre-planning this composition. I'm not thinking, well, if I put this here, the eye will move this way, and then this way, this way, this way. I am able to do that because I worked my ass off in school. Yeah. And because I had a grounding in looking at classical paintings and drawings from a lot of different art traditions. So when I'm teaching, what I tell students when they ask me what that kind of, what are the rules of doing this in comics, I say it's no different than the basic rules of 2D design. They are the same. And then obviously, we tweak it in our own work. And if you're teaching in a critique, you can say, well, okay, but there's a tangent over here. And I think if you move this word bubble, this will work better. Whatever. Those are little tweaks, excuse me. But I can see in my own work how much I studied painting. Yeah. And also like art historically, looking at painting and looking at scrolls and looking at all kinds of different narrative picture making. Also film. You know, we all study film, I think, in comics.
Oh, and there are so many aspects of this where the storytelling itself and the editing, I say cinematic, not in a visual way, but in terms of visual editing.
Yes.
It takes place. Victory Parade very much feels like there's a film editor's eye, in a sense.
Thank you.
To it. Yeah.
I take that as a huge compliment.
Yeah, no, it was
film
one of those.
editing is an incredible art form.
Ralph Rosenblum's book on that is one of my faves.
Oh, I don't know that. I'll have to write that down.
I'll zap it to you. Yeah,
please.
After the shooting stops is the
It's quite an incendiary title.
Yeah, he's the one who edited Annie Hall into the romance that it is, because it started out as a murder mystery.
It did?
Yeah.
God.
The footage was so not working that he basically recut it into a relationship thing, and they're like, oh, that's what this is, and started shooting extra scenes to fill in the yellow background.
This always makes me wonder, you know, how much credit can we really give a director?
It varies. And that's Steven Soderbergh's thing. The Limey is apparently his... the Terrence Stamp crime movie he did.
I love The Limey. That's a great movie.
Yeah, now he shot it...
Like, in terms of editing.
He shot it linearly and watched it and was bored, and so he recut it, and that's the movie we got.
Well, this is something that we do in comics all the time.
Yeah.
We move stuff around all the time.
And I was going to ask how difficult that is.
It's not easy.
With what you're doing visually, with the watercolors and everything else, I'm like, how much repainting, or is it just rearranging?
It is much easier in comics than it is in film because no one's getting paid.
Yeah,
except me
people in for reshoots
a little
and everything.
bit. You know, like, I'm not dealing with actual human beings who I have to have on a set and all of the other people that have to be there to support it. It's just me at my drafting table, and it's frustrating more than it's difficult.
When you know something has to be done.
Yeah, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of foot dragging, like, oh, crap, no.
Can I get away with this? I can't get away with this.
Yeah, when you know you can't get away with it, you do it. That's an ongoing conversation between me and my editor, who for this book was Alti Carper, who was wonderful. Yeah. She just retired from Schocken. She was Schocken Books for decades. She also edited people at Pantheon, Maine. She's wonderful. And, you know, we didn't always agree. And there were edits that she suggested that I did implement, and then ones that I pushed back on. I don't know how she felt about the Busby Berkeley death scenes.
I think they're great. But,
to me, they're my favorite thing I've ever drawn.
Yeah.
But in terms of kind of a film editing approach to making this book and other comics too, I have often said that for me, the process of making comics, writing them, is much more what I think screenwriting is probably like. Yeah. I'm sure there are differences too, but much more like that than it is like prose writing. I don't write prose. But I love good prose. It's just very different. So when I'm working on a comic, usually the first thing I ask myself is, what would Pedro Almodovar do? There's also a film called, and you know, I don't want to be redundant because I've given a lot of interviews in the past 15 years and I've probably said some of the same things. So you can push me past some of that stuff too. But there's a film by the German-Turkish director Fatih Akin called Head On that was like my school of storytelling for many years. I used to watch it a few times a year. It taught me so much about the balance of gritty realism and, I don't like the word artifice, but staging very explicitly in that movie. But Almodovar is kind of my big idol. You know, there's so many other filmmakers I love too. I also got a lot out of really good episodic TV. When I rewatched Deadwood after I had finished Untersaken, and I realized how much of it had influenced that book. It's so amazing, you know. More recently, stuff like Reservation Dogs, which is just a masterpiece.
It's an amazing work. And you always want to see things continue, but that was one where I was like, I get why they ended when they did. And it satisfied everything it needed to satisfy without having to do, you know, a cutesy ending or anything. But
I think, you know, in a contemporary era with that kind of screenwriting and TV, the good writing and when to end the story is more of a question than it was with something like MASH, right? Where it was like, okay, every week I'm going to go hang out with my favorite characters and see what stuff they're up to, you know? And it's really, MASH is one of the best written things I've ever seen too, especially after you get past the first couple of seasons.
That's a point of contention we're having as we work our way through. The later ones artistically are much greater. The first couple of seasons with Henry and Wayne Rogers and everybody, they're actually a lot funnier and more entertaining and still get across the anti-war point.
Oh, totally. I mean, they're all great. There's a few kind of dated things in season 1 and season 2. And then there's the transition also that comes later where they stop making rape jokes.
Yeah.
Where that stops being funny.
And
you can tell that somebody had the right conversation with them. Was like, you guys have to stop this.
Yeah.
I think they must have been forbidden from showing too much blood or screaming until the series finale.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, you know, for me, and I think this is another generational thing. This is like a real Gen X cultural trait that no one talks about, and I am really committed to talking about it, which is to really not pull any punches. Like, be very confrontational. Show very painful things, physically and emotionally painful things.
Yeah.
I think that was something that was of high value in the early 90s when I was coming of age as an artist. It was so deep in the subculture that raised me. And it infuses this book, especially the last one too. But I've been thinking about it a lot more. So when I think about MASH, I think like, okay, you know, in the scenes where wounded soldiers are being loaded off of helicopters and out of trucks into the operating theater, and that no one is screaming and no one's making any noise, no one's in pain. Everybody's like, what, are they all sedated already? Right. You know? Yeah. That must have been a network censorship thing.
Yeah, it just becomes too disturbing for the audience. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
A weekly show where half of the show is just people screaming in intolerable pain and suffering. I mean, that's what war is, so yes. I feel we've gotten away from your question. Who are my influences?
Oh, by the way, yeah.
I mean, my influences aren't all cartoonists or even necessarily visual artists or filmmakers either. Music is a really big part of influence on me, and just there's a lot of cultural forces that feed into my work.
I was going to ask, as you may or may not know from following the show, which you shouldn't, latecomer to Nick Cave.
Gil is wrong, everybody. You should follow the show.
Yeah, but yeah, a very latecomer to Nick Cave, only in the last year and a half, which always freaks out people who know me because they just assume I would be somebody who's listened to him for 30 or 40 years. And in fact, no, started at like 52. So that's
hey, no problem.
I'm trying to catch up. So
okay, so I will tell you then, everybody assumes I'm a huge Nick Cave fan. I'm actually more of a Nick Cave Sidemen fan.
You do quote, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Good. Okay, that's exactly what it looks like, and I never knew how to pronounce it. So, because he shows up in 20,000 Days on Earth, and I'm like, I have no idea who this guy is.
So he was the guitarist of the Bad Seeds for 20 years, but he is and has been since 1980 the front person of Einstürzende Neubauten, who are hugely important to me. Their World War I project, Lament, was like the thing I listened to during the major artistic turning point of my career. It's a huge influence on this book as well. But also Roland S. Howard, who was the guitarist of The Birthday Party, and then was in Crime and the City Solution and his own band, These Immortal Souls, who were amazing. All of these other side projects that he did that are great. And he's sort of, I guess, like a secret handshake. I think if you go to Australia, everybody loves him because he was Australian. Yeah. But, you know, when you meet someone here who gets his music, then you know, like, okay, we need to hang out or something.
You figure out the credibility thing. And
So I am much more of a Birthday Party fan than I am a Bad Seeds fan, which I know might sound like an insufferable, like, record collector thing to say.
It sounds like you're wearing it on your sleeve. See, the joke is she's wearing a sleeveless shirt that's a big Birthday Party logo. But anyway, that's just a visual joke for those of us who are actually in person. So.
The rest of the joke is that I don't have sleeves right now. I cut the sleeves off this shirt. Music.
Film, cartoonist, art.
Yeah.
Storytelling, prose. Are there writers who...
You know, I used to be a person who could read 4 books in a week. Mm-hmm. Then I had children. Then I left New York City, so I wasn't riding the subway every day, and I didn't have that downtime. I was biking everywhere. You can't read on a bike. My reading brain really got messed up by trauma. And then when the pandemic happened, it almost died. And since then, I have heard from a lot of people that they found it hard to read during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Did you have that experience?
I can't stop because of the show.
Right.
So I have to do this 50 times a year, so I just force myself through book after book and keep going.
And that's good.
Yeah,
it's your job.
That's why I put in the cartoonist every so often, so I don't have to read as much prose. But in the meantime,
you get to look at some pictures.
Yeah, I'm reading my struggle, the Knausgaard, my struggle, not the previous one.
Yeah.
At night on my Kindle, and it's one of those my leisure time activity is 3,600 pages of Norwegian autofiction. Sure, why not? Just last year was pension. This year I'll do this.
Listen, man, life is long. It's short, but it's long.
Yeah. That's what I'm finding. As it's been a very strange experience reading his book because it's throwing me back into a lot of memories that I hadn't recalled. There's an entire book right now, book 3 of this thing. It's him telling a story of him at 7, 8, 9 years old in Norway. And none of the essayistic flights of fancy. It's not written in a 7-year-old voice, but it's very just plain spoken of these things happening. And weirdly, that triggers more stuff that has no relation to what he's telling. But, all of a sudden, weird aspects of my childhood are just cropping up in my brain.
Well, that seems to me then that it's doing its job.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, if I ever see the guy, I'll punch him in the face for this. I mean, I'll give him all the credit in the world.
I was at a literary festival with him once, 9 years ago. He seemed okay. Seemed like a nice guy. I ran into him at the Rothko exhibition down the street from the festival, too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Influences,
art, storytelling. Well, during the pandemic, I had a funny thing happen in 2021, 22, when we all started kind of coming back again. The only thing I could read, my reading brain started to come back, but the only 2 authors I could read were Primo Levi and Lisa Carver. And that's still sort of the case. Yeah. I've always loved Lisa Carver. Yeah. I think she's an absolute genius. In fact, it's kind of weird to admit this, but the last show that I ever saw at CB's was in 1992, that's the weird part, is that I didn't go back for 15 years. I mean, I was living in other cities, but the last show I ever saw at CB's was Suck Dog.
Yeah.
I think it was the Freak Show tour with Dame Darcy. I got pulled up on stage and performatively groped by Jean-Louis Coste. It was great. So funny, complete non-story, boring little anecdote about comics. A decade later, when we had moved back to New York City, I went to go meet a bunch of comics people at some bar somewhere in Manhattan, and I got there, and everybody's at the back at a table, and I didn't know everybody, but, Kaz was there, and I think that it was the first time I ever met him. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there talking to somebody else, and suddenly I hear Kaz say, "Who was that French guy Lisa Suckdog was married to? Leela, you'll know the answer to this." And I immediately said, "Jean-Louis Coste?" And I don't know how he knew, because we had never met before. I asked him a couple of years ago, and he was like, "I don't know, I guess I just could tell."
One look at you, and I said, "That's how Lisa Carver."
I don't know. She looks like somebody who's been performatively groped on stage by Jean-Louis Coste,
there you go.
Half naked and covered in what was probably henna.
I mean, yeah, it's great.
I wasn't the one half naked.
Yeah, I know. That. So I was putting that one together on the fly, but yeah.
No, it was really fun. It was great. I had such a good time. But I was a huge reader of roller derby back in the day. And even, my first exposure to her was in Forced Exposure magazine. I found a back issue of it that had a tour diary by her when I was in high school. And I remember there was that, and maybe in the next issue, Steve Albini's Big Black tour diary, which is infamous, and you cannot find it anywhere except on the Internet Wayback Machine, from what I can tell now. It is extremely provocative and button-pushing and great and very, very funny. They both are.
Yeah.
But hers is reprinted in the Suck Dog book, which is excellent. I recommend it to anyone. Mm-hmm. She should be so much better known, and she should be in the... If there's an encyclopedia of confrontational women performance artists of the late 20th century, and she should be in there right next to Yoko Ono and Marina Abramovich and all these people. But anyway, her writing after that is also great. All of her essays and books that she's published since then.
Thomas sent me something recently. Your husband sent me some of her stuff recently. He said, "You got to get her on the show."
Yeah, you do. Yeah, please do. Yeah. Oh my God, that would be amazing.
You can come and be my sound engineer.
I would be so thrilled. Did he send you Money's Nothing?
I'm blanking on the book now.
Because that's the one that we both were recommending to a lot of people.
Probably then. Yeah.
She writes about class and especially the transition that happened in our generation from the underground to the internet economy, basically, in the late 90s, early aughts, better than anybody I know. So, and Primo Levi is like my moral compass, you know. One of the things I did for myself during the pandemic was buy the
slipcase,
the
3-volume thing. Yeah.
3-volume, yeah. And I'm still slowly working my way through that.
You don't find it cheery enough to keep... I'm just kidding. It's
Well, you know, he's even at his darkest, he can be very funny, which is very Jewish, you know. He's very, like, he's got that dark humor. I always think about that passage in The Truce where he describes trying to communicate with the Polish priest in the square in Krakow immediately after the war when it's chaos. He's trying to find the soup kitchen, and he doesn't speak Polish. Of course, this young priest doesn't speak Italian, and the only language they have in common is Latin, liturgical and classical Latin. So they have this very weird, labored conversation in words that approximate contemporary language. It's very funny.
Yeah. And gesticulative, I'm sure, trying to get across the...
if only we could see what that looked like, you know?
I was about to ask you about Untersaken and Victory Parade. One of the supporting pieces of material Pantheon sent me included a mention on your part of this being part of a triptych.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you want to know about that?
Well, I love jinxing creators. So what's the next book going to be?
Well, I'm not easily jinxed. I actually, I know that there are people who really don't like to talk about what they're working on.
It varies.
They're very superstitious
where they
about
are
it.
With it.
I love to do that because it brings it into reality.
Yeah.
So I was sitting in a cafe in the former West Berlin in 2018, and I was working on this book in my sketchbook. It was a really beautiful cafe, and I was thinking about growing up during the late Cold War and thinking about how weird that was and like what was this area like back then, what was happening here, who was hanging out here, trying to kind of see what was still legible from that time. And not knowing Berlin very well, I really couldn't. You know, I need to go back maybe with somebody who's from there and have them show me some stuff. But I was just thinking about the weirdness of being 9 years old and being absolutely sure that the leaders of the U.S. and the Soviet Union were going to kill us all in a nuclear holocaust.
I tried explaining to younger people, I know the environmental disaster is god-awful and you're going through a slow-motion apocalypse, but we spend our first 20 years assuming the world would end at any moment, that we're all going to die from a nuclear blast, and it gets in the back of your head. And I don't know how well any of us have extricated that. We pretend it doesn't exist. But we spent our formative years with that sense of the world's going to end and we won't know why. The buttons are going to be pushed and we'll just get vaporized. You know, like
by this selfish small group of people.
Yeah.
I was telling a friend who's a decade younger than me that our generation spent our childhoods being sure we were going to die in a nuclear holocaust and our sexual coming of age being sure we were going to die of AIDS.
Yeah. Oh, and on the drug side, famous basketball player tries coke once, has a heart attack, and dies.
That's right. I forgot about that.
I've never touched cocaine because of Len bias. And as the sole reason, I'm pretty straight edge in general, but that's one of those, anytime the subject comes up, I'm like, no, I would be the other guy.
Yeah.
I'd be the one guy who, boom, drops dead. So.
I never tried it either for different reasons, mainly because I had a very hard line on drugs. Like if it's addictive, I'm not going to try it.
Everything's addictive if you try hard enough.
Well, you know what I mean? Like in terms of like biochemically.
What's intended to do.
I'm not an expert on brain chemistry. But
no, many years ago on this show, I said anxiety is my drug of choice, and that's what I've lived with.
That's very Ashkenazi, I feel. Like that hypervigilance, it's a huge part of my daily consciousness, and I don't think that everyone can relate to that. You know, it's very cultural. And not to say we're the only people who have it either.
No, but we have a strain of it. We do.
Yeah. It's very particular. And the circumstances of my life have not made that any easier. Like being in a female body, the particular traumatic experience I had, all of those things really made me more hypervigilant. Mm-hmm. In fact, when the 2016 election happened, I've never been a big drinker, but I like to have a glass of wine now and then. That stopped because after the 2016 election, my hypervigilance kicked in so hard that I felt like I had to have my eyes on the horizon all the time. Like I couldn't let my guard down.
Oh, and did you see it as if I start doing this, this is going to spiral?
No.
Or is it just a looking outward at the world?
I drew the chemical long straw there, I think. Like if I drink more than 2 alcoholic drinks, I feel disgusting. Like it stops tasting good. Yeah. Actually, now if I have like a sip of it, I feel gross. I can't. It just makes me feel dehydrated and tired. I don't like being too relaxed, I guess. I don't like being relaxed.
Join the club. Says the guy who spends a Saturday driving 6.5 hours to do a podcast. This is great.
I can't believe it. But to come back to your question about the third book in the trilogy, so I'm
the Birnbaumi-ad, I'm calling it.
The Birnbaumi-ad, yes!
Or Birnbaum Unbound. You can go with that.
No, the Birnbaumi-ad is perfect.
Yeah, I like that.
Because, I also...
she brought back a character from the first book into this one named Meyer.
Yeah, do you want to talk about Meyer once we're done talking about the third book?
This will all tie together,
okay.
I'm sure.
Because I have things to say about Meyer. But also, Birnbaumi-ad works because I like bringing in Greek mythology into my work so much.
Yeah.
So I was sitting in this cafe, I was thinking about the Cold War, and then I thought, oh shit, this is a book, isn't it?
Did you have an image? Or did it... Have
I started thinking about my childhood in the 80s in New York and thinking like, fuck, I have to make a book about that, don't I? And, very quickly, this is also what happened with Untersaken. The characters, the basic characters and the structure suggested themselves to me immediately. You might be interested to know that all of the ideas for Untersaken happened while I was sitting in the audience at a Kim Deitch lecture at the 63rd Street YMCA in the auditorium where I had spent every summer morning of my childhood when I was 6, 7, 8 years old because I went to camp there.
Yeah.
So when I was a little kid, this auditorium looked massive. We would all gather in there and we would sing, like, The Other Day I Met a Bear and the YMCA song with I'm making the arm gestures for you listeners. And this was in the late 70s when everybody thought the Village People were straight, I guess.
My
I
parents
don't
were
know.
totally into disco and had no grasp whatsoever that in the Navy, all this, it's all just...
That was a Muppet Show routine based on In the Navy. Do you remember that?
I talked about that an episode or two ago because, the Keith Mayerson episode I just did. We talked about
I have to listen to that still, I think I'm going to listen to that later today.
But yeah, the Village People was just happy music. That's
totally,
how they describe it. My father also watched Cheech and Chong films with me when I was 10 and had no idea it was drug humor.
So my parents were ex-hippies, so that's probably why we didn't watch those, because they did not want me to see that. But so I was sitting in this cafe, I'm thinking about this stuff, I realized this is a third book, and immediately I thought, okay, this is a book in 2 halves. The first, I'm not sure which half goes where, but this is a book about people in New York City in the 1980s. Immediately I thought, well, obviously it's a multi-generational story. Maybe there are returning characters. I'm not sure yet. The way I'm envisioning it now, it's partially set in that time period and partially in the woods in Poland during the Second World War. And I have to say, lately I've been having some qualms about this. Not that I'm not going to do it, but just...
Oh my God, Leela Corman and the Polish woods in World War II. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Sort of like... I'm so sick of my own much tread environment, much trodden. I don't know. At the same time, I feel a responsibility to talk about all of the ways in which the Second World War was chaotic and messy. Because what's happening now as survivors are dying is this tidying up of the narrative. The belief that, for example, everyone was in a concentration camp. I even saw somebody floating the idea that you can't call people survivors if they weren't in camps. I didn't see that take off, luckily. That didn't take hold.
Yeah.
But my family lived in a fucking hole in the ground for the last couple of years of the war. My grandmother was pregnant with my aunt in the final 5 months of the war. I have been pregnant twice. I cannot imagine being pregnant in a hole in the ground in the Polish winter, nor under bombardment in Gaza.
Right.
Or any other war zone. So I want to acknowledge that. My positionality when I work with the Holocaust is not insular.
Mm-hmm.
It is my way of carrying my little corner of humanity's coffin at the funeral.
Yeah. But not making it Jew specific, perhaps.
Yeah. Well,
you know what I'm trying to get at?
Well, what I feel is
expanding that to a universal.
Yes.
I guess is what I'm trying to say.
In terms of, I think you're Jewish too, right?
Yes, of course I am. You found out.
So I feel like in our communities there have been two sort of broad reactions to the Shoah. One is to look inward, be very insular, say this is an exceptional tragedy that only happened to us, and therefore we have to only look out for ourselves. I'm being very reductive.
No, but yeah,
I'm just trying to sort of get a couple of really big things across. Mm-hmm. The other is to say this is one major atrocity in a long history of human cruelty, and it belongs to us, so we must talk about it, but it's imperative to connect it to all of the other atrocities and genocides as well, because this is a darkness in our species. Yeah. And that is where I have always been. I'm extremely... I'm going to sound like I find this great and fun. I've always been obsessed with genocide. Hmm. It's a huge part of... I mean, you were talking about...
Rwanda happened in your early 20s.
Yeah, and also the war in the Balkans, which people don't talk about.
Yeah. A friend
anymore.
of mine's we'll say a war reporter who spent a chunk of time there. He went back recently because things are getting nuts. And it's same thing. People just kind of put that one under the rug.
Yeah, people forget about it. Yeah. I saw somebody say in print at some point in the past year that there hasn't been a genocidal war in Europe since the Second World War.
Perhaps they don't count the former Yugoslavia as Europe?
There's this sort of benighted attitude in the U.S. that Europe is only Western Europe. And I see that like in my own leftist circles too, when people talk about colonialism, sometimes it's like they think the English invented it. Yeah. And that it only ever happened there and in places they went. And, as an Eastern European...
Nope, sorry, got a surprise for you.
Yeah, as a person... from Poland, I have some things to say. But in any case, I have qualms about... I don't want my work to be seen now that the Shoah is being once again profaned to justify the murder of tens of thousands of people and the displacement of those people and the stealing of their land. I am not on the side of that. And that is not the purpose of my work. But also, I sort of also feel pissed off, there's not one group of Jewish people who get to talk about the Holocaust and get to control the narrative. We all get to have it.
I had qualms about some of the wording with Jonathan Glazer's Oscar speech, but I'm like, it would have been nice if he mentioned the hostages, but okay, nonetheless, I feel like he made a significant point, and the blowback was part of the significant point he was trying to make.
Yeah, I stand with him 100%. Yeah. I also think The Zone of Interest is a masterpiece.
Haven't seen it. I thought it was weird that nobody mentioned Amos in any of their acceptance speeches, or at least I didn't catch that, but whatever. That's he stood
I'm not
me
really
up
an
for a
Oscars
podcast.
person, so I didn't watch it.
I've watched it for the first time in a million years. My side thing is that Martin Amos canceled on me 3 days before we were going to record after I'd read 1,500 pages of his work, so I've always held it against him. But still, I felt that they should have probably mentioned his name while they're accepting an Oscar from a movie based on his book.
Well, only loosely. Only loosely. Yeah. See it, and do yourself a favor if you can see it on a big screen. Yeah,
I'm trying to. I wrote about it recently. I went out to see Perfect Days, the Wim Wenders movie.
I really want to see that
in the theater. First time I've been in the movie since 2018, because I don't go out much because I hate other human beings, except you. So I came up here.
I can tell that Gil hates human beings.
Yeah, I put on a good mask, but that's the other one I've been thinking of. Yeah, if it gets to New Jersey, so I don't have to drive into New York and go through all the goddamn hassle, I'll do Zone of Interest as my next one.
There's always NJ Transit, that utterly reliable.
Yeah, I could drive in, but then I'm in New York dealing with people in New York, and it's It gets a little tiring. I'll put it that way. But anyway, I should go see this movie. Is what you're saying.
It's an absolute masterpiece. But so when I think about this next book, I think I'm obsessed with the topic. Well, I will continue because there's more I have not said about it. I started out wanting to talk about both this final decade of New York. To me, I'm calling it final because it was the last decade of New York before money came in and took over it completely.
Yeah.
And when people talk about New York in the 80s, they have very cliched ways of talking about it that don't correlate to what life was like there. You know, I mean, they do. It depends who's talking.
Sure.
I just finished Thurston Moore's memoir, which is so great. Oh my God, get him on your show. It's such a great book. The first, like, half of it is this loving remembrance and love letter to the punk and post-punk avant-garde of early 80s New York, which I'm totally fascinated with. And it was really, that was formative for me. I was too young to take part in it, but I knew that it was happening once I was about 15 years old, and I was really, really interested in it. That was when I discovered Sonic Youth also, who, like, very big formative influence on me in the mid-late 80s. But, you know, so when he talks about, or anyone who was living on the Lower East Side at the time talks about it, okay, that's one facet of New York at that time or at any time. It's a huge city. So I grew up on 105th and West End in a neighborhood that was not the Lower East Side, very, very decidedly not.
Literally the opposite. Yeah.
Well, it may be the opposite now, but I mean, at the time it was not a gentrified neighborhood. It was actually pretty scruffy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was real scruffy. In fact, in the 60s and 70s, it was considered like, you know, a little bit like, ooh, edgy to move there, you know. We moved there in 1976 when I was a very small child from the Bronx. It was a neighborhood with a lot of character, bookstores and cafes. Actually, the best cafe is still there, the Hungarian on 110th.
Oh, no shit.
Right across from the cathedral. The Cathedral of St. John the Divine, I should say, which is an amazing place. I saw Bishop Desmond Tutu speak there when I was 14, and that was earth-shaking. Diamanda Galas recorded the Plague Mass there. That place is amazing. So I wanted to talk about that time period because when people talk about it, they don't know how interesting it was. Like, it was a time when normal people could live in Manhattan. Yeah. You know, my dad worked in construction. My mom was a social worker.
I just did the Keith Haring bio, a book around that with Brad Gooch. And to me, that's the best part of the book. And Brad was around for a lot of that era also, 70s into 80s New York City. And it's a different world.
It's a different world.
Artists could get by. Again, you're talking about people, I think before we started recording, the lofts and things people had once upon a time or were squatting in, basically. I think one of Brad's stories from his memoir, which we also recorded about, was just living in Alphabet City when that was not cool, safe, or otherwise somewhere to be in the slightest, and just, you know, factoring in how often you're going to get mugged, you know, walking to your apartment.
Yeah. And that is what people talk about. I mean, that was also the case on some of the side streets in my neighborhood, and you just knew to avoid them. Like, especially, like, there are some blocks between Broadway and Columbus and Amsterdam that I didn't feel safe on as a young teenage girl after dark.
Sure.
At all. But that was like the calculus of New York City at the time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's good, but the fact that it was an average person's city. And when people start spouting the narrative that it was a nightmare, it was all escape from New York, I have to ask who that narrative serves. I think it serves developers and very wealthy people who've made it their playground. In any case, the other part of the book is about, I envisioned from the start, being mostly about women partisans, Jewish women partisans. And so when I went to Yaddo last year for a residency, I started working on it because it's funny. I started going to residencies while I was working on Victory Parade. So I had been to maybe 4 or something, maybe 5, and I'd been working on Victory Parade at all of them. I went back to Yaddo for the second time last year, and it was the first time I was at a residency without having that project hanging over me. I had delivered it. So they gave me this painting studio that was, I want to say it was bigger than the length of this room.
Yeah.
About maybe a little, and also a little wider, with windows all around, skylights, and a huge homosote wall. And then I had asked for a drafting table. So I thought, I'm going to work on this next book. And so I'm sitting in this corner for like the first 4 days or so, maybe a week of this residency, taking notes on this, watching film of these, at this point, elderly Yiddish women who had been partisans, and bawling my eyes out because these women all looked like my grandmother and my great aunts. They all had the coral fingernails and the big hair and the colorful blouses and the flawless eyebrows and the Yiddish accents that you can't replicate.
And just talking about sniping Nazis.
Totally. They're talking about blowing up Nazi bridges. And and also like how to not get pregnant in the forest. What to do when you have your period in the forest.
Yeah.
The necessity of having to hook up with a man for protection. Something called forest marriages.
Yeah.
So all of these concerns that, that's the stuff that's really alive for me. But I also started to think about these women and how amazing they are and how amazing they remained for the rest of their lives. So I started sketching from the stills. I have this really good friend who, he's sort of my Ashkenazi brother. I sent him a photo of the drawings that I had made of the stills of these ladies. And his response was, all of these women are very disappointed that I didn't become a doctor.
My son, the doctor, is drowning.
Oh, you know that joke? That's my favorite joke. Help, help, my son, the doctor, is drowning. So, at one point, I just was like, sitting there thinking, I looked over at the wall of Homosote and then at myself in this little corner. And I went into town and I got a giant roll of paper and I put it on the wall and I started painting. And those women started coming out in these paintings. So that's what I'm really working on now. And I'll send you some images.
Sure.
They're all going to be in the show in New York next week. So I started making these massive paintings of these women. And I started to realize how much I want this book to really be around grandmas and aunties. And I want to pay tribute to these great Yiddish ladies who really are a vanishing class of people. It's a really specific culture. Yeah. So that is what is becoming the next book. I don't know when I'm going to do it because I don't feel like drawing comics right now. I just feel like painting and teaching. Do
you know when you have the comics bug? Are you able to recognize when it hits?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I liken it to, I know
Space
we've both
Madness?
been married for a long time, but like when you're dating, I never called it dating, but when you break up with someone, you can't just jump into the next relationship. Right. At least I could never. Like, I
had to go on the ex-girlfriend victory tour for a while first.
Oh no!
Yeah, there's a whole story I could fill you in on, but
well, not me. I did not do that. I have a tendency to not talk to ex-boyfriends, and it's usually not because of bad things. Every once in a while, but it's just sort of like I just move on.
It's different for girls, but anyway, that's it.
I like Joe Jackson. So I just.
You broke up with comics for a little while?
No, I didn't break up. I need some fallow time.
Yeah.
I don't really know when I know I'm ready again. You just know. I mean, I'm not 100% sure when I will start working on it, but I definitely I think I need to at least get through Victory Parade coming out and the sort of the feedback loop of that. Mm-hmm. Not because any of that is going to influence the next book, but just because that takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Ever more energy.
No, it's just that we have ever less energy as we're over 50 now. But,
totally. Yeah. And, that's funny. Like, my energy output is it's very different from what it used to be.
But again, you pick your spots, but you also know what you can do better, right? And that's what I was trying to get across, the comparison between the two books, the sense of unity throughout Victory Parade. It feels like somebody who was in full control of her art, not just visually, but, storytelling and everything you really put it together.
I'm glad. I'm glad. And with Untersaken, with both of these books, it took a long time, and there were a lot of periods where I wasn't working on it. I was doing other things. I had to make a living also.
I'll say that one feels more staggered. It feels like there are moments, this was done earlier, this was done later.
Definitely. Yeah, and you can see that. Although I can see it in that book.
Of course, every artist sees their own,
I mean, the earliest pages don't look like the latest pages. Yeah. But they do look a lot more similar. Mm-hmm. Also, because I know what I did when. But there is, it is more stylistically unified. It's more consistent. Yeah.
I'll say about the partisan thing. I did a show. I'm on a weird run with women guests of mine. The most recent one, Edith Hall, had a book about suicide, the ancient Greeks, and her own family history, where Philoctetes' play comes in, which of course comes in Victory Parade also, the Sophocles play, which I mispronounced previously, but Edith corrected me in the podcast. The one before that was a woman named Liz Flock, who had a book called The Furies, about the 3 different instances of women taking violence into their own hands in their life. And the last chapter is about women who formed an all-female brigade or battalion in Syria of Kurdish women who were basically fighting for their own autonomous zone. So it's a book I'm going to send by because I think you might get something from that in terms of what you're experiencing with the Yiddish women from the 40s. You might find something in there that again universalizes this into women everywhere. You can get kind of pissed off. Liz's favorite picture is this woman, maybe shorter than you, in fatigues, holding a rocket-powered grenade launcher with a big smile on her face at the camera, and it's
for the listener, I'm very short.
Yeah, I figured, they'll get, but yeah, it's just this gal, hey, just smiling and about to fire off a rocket-powered grenade, and it's people. In that case, they were fighting for their homeland and or fighting for a homeland that they'd never had. So yeah, it's something about interviewing women this year on the show. They come in much more momentous than the guys.
Sometimes for a woman, your only homeland is your body. Yeah,
and you're fighting for that.
Yep.
Let me ask you. You mentioned the feedback loop. Just the whole process of releasing the book and book tour, publicity, etc. Family response to your comics and to this.
My parents are they're proud of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have they read it? Do they have any comments, notes, or any?
I don't think so.
There's too much amputation. I don't like the amputation in your books all the
time. No.
They don't sound like that at all, right?
No.
Good.
No.
My mom's British. My dad's Romanian Israeli. So I can't do either of their accents in the slightest. I just throw a generic,
a parent accent.
Yeah, Jewish parent accent. So I'll throw people off the trail, But the dismemberment thing, as far as imagery goes for you,
what about it?
It comes up a bunch.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I don't know why.
Okay.
I guess also, there's a sort of an obvious answer, which is that happens to people in war.
Yeah. But it comes in your non-war, your nonfiction stuff too.
Does it?
I'm pretty sure in You Are Not a Guest, it's in some of the.
Oh yeah, well that's a post-war story.
Yeah.
That's a story about severing because of war. I think most artists, if we are being honest, are working with the subconscious so much that if an artist can tell you why they did everything, I think there's too much calculation happening there.
Yeah.
It's funny, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine who was a painter and is now like a multimedia video artist, does a lot of really big, large-scale multimedia video sculptures and installations, and we were talking about artist statements.
Yeah, go on.
So,
I shouldn't just...
well, I mean, there's the sort of gobbledygook, like garbage talk ones that I feel are generally written by and for a kind of a gallery setting, I don't mean to be overly disparaging, but like that doesn't really tell you much about why the artist made what they did or their process or what they're really interested in most of the time, from what I can tell. There's a whole different set of artist statements that you write when you are applying for something, when you're asking for money or space.
Yeah.
And those are much more straightforward. And those are the kind that I enjoy writing.
Yeah.
I did not go to grad school, so I am not capable of writing the other kind. But also I feel like the other kind is for other people to write, not the artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that sheds any light on how I think about my work, but there's a tremendous amount of stuff that comes up in my work without my making it come.
Yeah, it's not a conscious thing, but
it arises while I'm working and I approve of it.
I'll go with that. What has teaching taught you?
Teaching has made me a much better artist.
Yeah.
It's taught me to... really experiment. I've always been an experimenter, and the heart of my work is improvisation that then gets iterated into something that doesn't look improvised, but improvisation is the beginning of it always. And in every art form I've worked in, that's been the case. I don't know how anybody works without starting with improvising. You got to start somewhere. But teaching has really clarified a lot of the experimentation and improvisational approaches to making art that I kind of always had already. And also it's a blast to put out an assignment to 15 students and then get 15 iterations of it back and talk to them about it. It's so cool. And they have such radically different approaches. So I really love teaching. I think it's great. It's also it depends on what I'm teaching too, how I feel about it. You know, what's happening in that process. But teaching comics and storytelling is one kind of amazing. Teaching experimental approaches to visual problem solving is a whole other kind of fun experience. And I get to do both, which is great.
Not in those goddamn kids way, but how have students changed? Like what sort of the visual or storytelling background they're bringing into a class? Is that?
Well, I haven't been a fixed point in time and space as a teacher. Okay. You know, I was at University of Florida for a long time, and I was teaching an elective, so I wasn't getting artists who were on a professional track mostly. So they were making all kinds of stuff. And now I'm at RISD, and I would say when I teach the sophomore requirement class that I teach sometimes, a good 3/4 of my students are from mainland China or Hong Kong or Taiwan and sometimes Korea. So they're already coming from different cultures with a completely different pop culture and folklore and reference points and stuff that they're interested in, ways of making, ways of even thinking about what an artist looks like. So I try to take a lot of cues from them, from all my students. The first assignment is always one where they have to bring in work that they love by other artists and talk about it, which is a stealth way for me to learn about new things because I don't have time.
I was just going to ask what discoveries you've made in recent years. So
really interesting ones, really cool ones. It also shows me where they're looking for work. Every semester, at least 2 people bring in Alphonse Mucha, which I think is really funny because that was happening when I was in school too. But you know, there's a lot of also at least one person every semester brings in Miyazaki, which of course, why wouldn't you? Yeah. But there's also these great surprises, interesting sculpture, installation artists, painters, all kinds of artists I've never heard of. It also broadens my cultural awareness as a teacher, which I'm there to help them launch their careers. I'm not there to transmit some like great body of knowledge that I have. I mean, that happens. It's important as a teacher. It's sometimes being a teacher is kind of just like getting to make everybody a mixtape every week of your favorite songs.
Means I should take up teaching because, well, anyway, that was fine.
You know what? It's really fun. Like so the other population I'm teaching right now are grad students, which is just a delight. They are so high energy and charismatic. They're like these heat-seeking missiles of artists, you know, and every week when I go in to meet them, I'm just, it wakes me up. It fills me with life. They're all women this semester, and they're all really interesting. The work that they're making is really diverse, and they're all really obsessive about it, which I just love. So that's a fun place where I can draw on all of my different influences and kinds of art that I've been interested in or made over the years and share stuff with people like, okay, this person seems like they might really benefit from knowing about this thing. But they're constantly telling me the stuff that they're interested in too. So it's a two-way street, and that's one of the best parts about it.
Last question, because I'm eating up your entire Saturday. Actually, be 2 questions. Meyer Birnbaum, who has shown up in 2 of your books so far, bringing him in some way, shape, or form for the third one? Are you trying to figure out whether a descendant or some way of including him? Well,
so the thing about Meyer is in Untersaken, he completely wrote himself. Like, he showed up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
This does not usually happen. You know, writing is kind of a laborious process. But he just strolled in one day and started talking. It was really weird. I don't know how else to describe it. It makes me sound like some, like, budget mystic or something, but I don't mean it that way. It wasn't mystical. It was just like, there he is, and he's there. That's what he says. I had to work at it a little bit more in the second book, but it made complete sense that in the second book he would come back and be a wrestling promoter.
Yeah.
And I tried to make him age. I don't think I did a great job.
Somewhat.
Aged a little bit, you know. Yeah. He got a little heavier and his hair got a little grayer.
Yeah.
But he's also an homage to Gilbert Hernandez's Gorgo character. So for people who don't know this, my work is full of Hernandez brothers homages. Like, absolutely full. Both Jaime and Gilbert. That book is full of them, and so is Untersaken.
Go deep cut and get a Mario character in there. I'm just kidding.
I haven't read his work as much. I mean, you know, except for early on.
Yeah.
You know.
I think, that was all he contributed to those early issues.
But, I mean, there's a direct homage to a wrestling scene that Jaime drew in the death scene.
Yeah.
Did you catch it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I was just about to do the gesture, but yeah, go on.
Right,
yeah,
it's the one where oh my God, why am I blanking on the name of Maggie's aunt? In her wrestling school, Rena.
Rena Chatagnon? Oh, no,
well, no, Rena's not her aunt. Rena's the other one.
Yeah, forgetting Rena's
Former
the sort
tag
of team
partner
and then
yeah.
Nemesis. God damn it. It'll go in the show notes for this one. You Hernandez Brothers fans will ridicule us for not remembering.
Hey, man. Life's real busy. We can't remember everything all the time. Memory is like a very messy filing cabinet. Not everything is up front.
The female lead in American in Paris was?
Audrey Hepburn?
No. An American in Paris, the Gene Kelly, Oscar Levant, and there's a female French dancer.
Oh, no. Oh, Leslie Caron.
That's it.
Leslie Caron.
I've been blanking on that since last night, and I've been trying to remember.
Why did I think Audrey Hepburn was in that film?
You're thinking of Roman Holiday.
Thank you. Yes.
Weirdly, I knew that's what you were thinking of, even though none of those words overlap with each other.
Yeah, so. but I love Gene Kelly. You know, there's a whole Tumblr just devoted to his butt. It's just called Gene Kelly's butt.
I've sketched him a few times,
Tumblr.
and just as body types go, it's just so absolutely freeing to draw a guy who looks like that. You know?
Gene Kelly was the best. Just go watch more of his dance
Leslie
numbers.
Caron, that's what I was trying to remember.
Yeah, who was also in Gigi.
Yeah, which I refused to look up while I was driving. I'm like, I'm not going to. So I will remember this at some point instead.
Okay, so why are we talking about?
Let's see. You're doing a Beto Hernandez reference. American in Paris. Oh, because you couldn't remember the wrestlers.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah.
Anyway,
So there's that scene where she's running a wrestling school, and she's bouncing this character around the panel in this really kinetic way. And so I was thinking about that. But Gorgo is my homage. I mean, sorry, Meyer is my homage to Gorgo, the protector character who never seems to. He ages, but he doesn't die.
Yeah,
he can't be killed.
He gets shot. He gets hit by a car. He gets set on fire, but somehow keeps coming back.
Yes, and so Meyer is that in his own way. It just made sense to me. So he might come back. You know, I mean.
Birnbaum, you got to find some way, at least for a flashback, for this character to show up again.
I can absolutely think of a couple of ways that Meyer would show up.
The Leela Corman extended universe. That's what
Such as it is. Such as it is. Did you catch that the wrestling instructor is Esther?
I got the name. I'm blanking on what the reference is.
Esther from Untersaken becomes
the same one? Okay. That makes sense.
I was very low-key about that.
Yeah. No,
I don't want to be on the nose about that stuff, you know?
But Easter eggs are nice, you know?
Yeah.
Nerd out moments with your favorite cartoonists? Have you been dumbstruck around?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually am incapable of acting like a normal human being around Jaime Hernandez. And, so let me just give a little background here. As I said, I am from New York, and in New York we have a deal. You see a famous person, you ignore them. That's why they like being there, because we pretend that they are nothing special. And to me, most celebrities are nothing special. I don't like fame.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of gross. Yeah. But so also because you're in proximity to all kinds of people in New York all the time, it's gauche to react to it.
Yeah. My thing is that I will occasionally pitch them on podcasts, but very infrequently. Seeing Simon Doonan across the street, I had I should pitch him on the show. B, if I tell my wife I saw Simon Doonan and didn't actually go up and talk to him, she'll be pissed off at me. And he was very giving and outgoing and crazy. We ended up doing a show a couple of months later. But yeah. So,
I need to go dig through your archives again. Yeah. I like Simon Doonan. He's cool.
It was fun. I did it back to back with Simon Critchley, the philosopher, solely so I could do the Simon and Simon episodes of the show, getting back to our 80s thing. But
that's really funny.
But anyway, your Jaime thing.
So, when I've been at events where he's there, I'm like, I took a writing workshop with Linda Barry in 2001 that completely changed my life. Like it was the foundation of my teaching practice.
Yeah. And
when she walked in the room, I just burst into tears. But she's also really, she was teaching us, so she was very warm and personable.
And I know other people who have that same reaction, like Summer Pierre and people like that have just talked about the Linda Barry moment especially.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I would be mad at myself if I didn't have that moment.
Yeah. But you met Jaime.
I was on a panel at Brooklyn Book Festival with Gilbert Hernandez, and afterwards Jaime walked up to me and shook my hand and introduced himself, and I was like, I know who you are. I'm just too shy to say hello, so I'm an idiot. But for the most part, I mean, we're comics people. We're all, there's no like,
as Dan Clowes put it, it's like being the world's most famous badminton player.
Totally.
Yeah, that doesn't mean too much in the outer world.
No,
so,
I mean, it means something like to each other. It's wonderful to meet artists that you love. And I think actually what's more common than being dumbstruck is that you eventually do become friends with a lot of people whose work you have admired for years. Like, outside of comics as well, I collaborate with the musician Talia Zedek a lot. And I've been a fan of her music since I was 18 years old. I was in a used record store with a friend who had been in a few of the smaller bands in the New York circuit in the 80s. And he pulled a Live Skull album out of the bin and he said, hey, you're a big Sonic Youth fan. You would really love this band. These guys were like the musicians' band. And so I took it home and I listened to it. And he described Talia to me. He was like, yeah, now on their last few records, they had this singer who was like, she was like this tomboy. I don't know if that's an accurate description. I don't know. The person who was telling me this was a little bit of a sort of a trad guy, so maybe that's why he described her that way. But then I was in art school in Boston and she was in a band called Come that became a really popular band. And they're still one of my favorite bands. Yeah. So, her music was like the soundtrack of my life for many, many years before we became friends. And now we collaborate on this interesting kind of music comics thing. I was just there yesterday rehearsing the thing we're doing for my book tour, which is going to be really nice.
Yeah.
The music she's playing is great. So if you're in New York, no, we're not doing it in New York. What am I saying? If you're in LA or Seattle or Providence, you can see that. And if you want to, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking directly to the listeners now. Yeah. If you want to bring us to your town, just write to me. I
will put information about it in the show and episode notes for this.
Thank you. We are always happy to travel and perform. But so this is a thing that happens because the world is actually pretty small. And like the pool of artists that you are actually connected to is, I think, that we are connected to is fairly small.
Yeah. I've told the story before. I marvel over the fact that Eddie Campbell and I are pals. For somebody whose work I just idolized when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, I'm like, I can just drop Eddie a line, or Dave McKean is going to write me about something out of the blue occasionally. And I'm on Chris Ware's Christmas card list, which is always the strangest of all those phenomena every
also
December.
A super nice guy in comics. Comics is an industry, is a scene of really good people, right, for the most part.
That's and I seem to gravitate to those, or at least people connect me with the guys who are nicer, as opposed to, this dude's an asshole, but I guess you should have recorded with him.
I mean, who is that? Like, there aren't that many. I think maybe in the mainstream comics world,
Oh yeah, that world I'm completely divorced from. But there are a couple of guys in the indie scene who I just have a.
Me too, and we can talk off mic about that because I don't.
Which is more fun.
I will tell the listeners I don't talk smack on mic.
But a lot off mic. But anyway, but real last question: since you have your reading brain back, what are you reading?
I am reading Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I slept on her music for years, but
don't know her at all.
She is an incredible, fierce, gorgeous singer, Inuk singer from Canada, who also like vocal experimenter, incredible, doing stuff that was like, okay, so I'll say there's this new place in town. Brown just opened this really beautiful new arts complex. Mm-hmm. And literally, like, you can walk from here in 15 minutes.
You also have an art supply place right down the hill, which I thought was nice.
Jerry's Artorama. Very nice place. But so the Brown Arts Institute has been bringing these amazing people. Like, one of my favorite artists, William Kentridge. I cannot believe I was in the room with William Kentridge. Like, I got to go see him give a talk. Absolutely mind-blowing. And then he came back to present a play that he had directed a few months later. And then, like, Meredith Monk came and performed. We went to see her, and then I took a workshop with her and some of her people. That was incredible. And then a week after that, Tanya Tagaq came and performed, and I knew she was great, so I just bought a ticket. I didn't know what to expect. Really one of the most incredible musical performances I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen a lot of music.
You've gotten that across, yeah.
Just like the best. So now I need to go buy all her records. But they were giving out copies of her novel. Which is great. I highly recommend it. Get her on your show.
Again, I need connections. My world is schmoozing, as you know. The funny thing for me, by the way, I once was talking to a German client of mine, and I said schmoozing is my mutant superpower, and he didn't know what schmoozing was, and I had this moment of, don't say you probably didn't hear a lot of Yiddish growing up. Don't say, I just try to find some way of. I know they're all good with my history and their history, but yes, there was trying to explain what schmoozing is. I'm like, networking, but with a little more heart, and
networking, but with food, maybe.
Yes, that's part of it too.
Because we're Jews. Yeah, we feed people.
I do my schmooze and
But you're the person who brought the food this time. I feel sort of bad.
I brought pie, which is sort of an American thing to do. But
it's okay. We're very assimilated here. I was going to offer you Girl Scout cookies, which is like so goyish.
But Split Tooth, I will give it a look. Leela, thanks for coming on the show, and I'm glad we made the time to do it this way instead of a remote or something like that. And I'm glad we waited until Victory Parade, because
likewise,
this is a monumental piece of work, and I'm really glad you made it.
Thank you for saying that, and Gil, thanks for having me on your amazing show. I love this show, and it's a real honor.
Thanks. And that was Leela Corman. Her new graphic novel, Victory Parade, it's an absolute marvel, and it's out now from Schocken Books. Go get that. And get her previous full-length book, Untersaken, as well as her short collections, You Are Not a Guest and We All Wish for Deadly Force. She really makes amazing comics. And if one person ends up picking up her work because of this episode, I'll be happy, but I'm hoping there's going to be lots of people who start grooving on Leela's stuff. You should also check out her site, leelacorman.com, for more about her work, appearances, music comics events, and more. And that's leelacorman.com. She's also on Instagram and Blue Sky as Leela Corman, all one word, all spelled the same way, and on Patreon as Leela, Leela. You should support her work there. Now, I know she mentioned it over the course of conversation. I did not ask about belly dancing. We didn't talk about the death of her first child. She did. I didn't bring anything up about it. And I didn't ask anything about her collaboration with Talia Zedek and the whole music comics thing. I figure we can talk about some of that the next time we get together. And I did talk about her child with her husband, Tom Hart, back in our 2020 episode. But there's so much more we could have talked about. And I know this one went long as is, but this was one of those things where Gil and guest kind of just groove, and we leave a lot of things by the wayside, but we still get a lot of things in there. Anyway, the other thing, as I mentioned, in case you missed it at the top, Vicky Glory is Maggie's wrestler aunt in Love and Rockets. We are both horrendously embarrassed that we blanked on that name. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast comes out every week with really interesting conversations with fascinating creative folks. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or comic or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. You can do that by email, by postcard or letter. I love those. And I put my mailing address in the twice a week email that I send out in case you get my newsletter or want to get my newsletter. You can also leave a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. You go longer than that, it'll cut you off. Just call back and leave the rest of your message. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with listeners, but I would never run something like that without the speaker's permission. So, let me know. If you got money to spare, don't give it to me. I mean, I've got the Patreon, that newsletter that I mentioned, which is buttondown.email/VMSpod. That's got a paid tier. There's no paywall material. It's just a way of supporting the podcast and what I do. But anyway, don't do that. Give money to other people and other institutions. There are lots of people out there who need help with medical bills or rent or veterinary bills or car payments, who are just really caught up in circumstances and are having a tough time, or they're trying to get an artistic project off the ground. I might do that later this year. I've got an idea for a book I want to produce, and I'm thinking of kickstarting it as a way of figuring out how many people would actually want it, and having the money to make something that's really special instead of my kind of doing it on the side. More about that as the year progresses. For now, help other people. Go through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, whichever of those crowdfunding platforms out there you like, and just try and help people out, because, there's a lot of people who could use just a little help to get by. Also, there are institutions you can give to. I give to my local food bank every month, make occasional contributions to the Poor People's Campaign, targeted election contributions, because I'm a lobbyist. That's part of my gig. Freedom funds, election funds, Planned Parenthood and Women's Choice. I'm also planning on giving $500 to the World Central Kitchen, founded by Jose Andres after the Israeli army murdered a bunch of their aid workers in Gaza yesterday. I'll just put it in those terms. Those guys are doing relief work. They were targeted and killed, and we got to support NGOs. We got to support ways we got to support the people who are trying to make the world a better place. That's what I'm getting at here. So if you've got a little to spare, help. Just try to help make the world a little bit better. Okay? Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.